Okay, I'm going to be juggling computers, so bear with me. That's me. Um, and this is broadly what I'm going to be talking about today. So, caring responsibilities as distinct from conventional parental responsibilities alone. Caring responsibilities can involve looking after children, but the law and now policy makes a distinction because we know that there are other forms of caring that we have. And Warwick's definition is a person providing unpaid care to a whole range of people, the ones that you would expect, close family, but it can also include neighbours and others who you could reasonably expect to rely on you because they have a long-term physical or mental health disability, age-related problems, etc. And the need has to be significant. I mean, it's a very, very broad definition, inevitably, because human life, as we know, incredibly various, and the aim of this policy is to try and capture as much of what goes on as possible. And following the legislation, the university policy offers paid leave of up to 5 days, and it could be taken in hours as well, and part-time is pro rata. University also has to try and, if you like, bring the policy to life, a carer's, what it calls a carer's passport, and that's a live document, which in theory is owned by the employee, yep, as opposed to the traditional manager calling you in and arranging what's going on. Essentially, the employee owns it, brings it to their line manager, and has a conversation about what's going on, their needs, and that's reviewed periodically. So it's intended, it's a formal document, but sort of managed as informally as possible, so that it's not it's not too bureaucratic. So, and it's the aim is it prompts conversations, and it prompts, ideally, in theory, it prompts repeated conversations because things change, as we know, with caring responsibilities, and new flexibilities sometimes need to be considered. And it also acts as a record of absences that are taken with caring responsibility. And that's something that's quite important because in the past, people have taken absences, you know, they've got an emergency, they need to, or take their parents to the doctors or whatever, they've had to take sick leave or annual leave or whatever. And the university is currently developing a new policy, which we had to comment on as it was being developed. I'm not sure where it's ended up. But one of the things that we wanted to put into it was that there should be a presumption that it's not sick leave that is taken, that it is caring leave, if you like. Okay, so where am I? Next one. Okay, so as Francis said, we sit on the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I have issues around the word inclusion, but we can come back to that in the discussion, perhaps. And we were charged with focusing on caring responsibilities. We've previously done work on parental responsibilities, specifically on parental leave, for example. And university is interesting because there is largely a division between academics and professional services colleagues, and professional services colleagues who are often working in administrative roles have traditionally been much more office-based and have, if you like, more measurable contracted working hours, working days, whereas academic contracts are very different. Basically, the duties are specified, but hours are not specified contractually. So the aim was to try and understand the impact it's having on the range of colleagues in our department in the university, just in our little department. And we wanted to identify areas for improvement, any good practice that was going on, and obviously we imagined we might service some bad practice, and we wanted to improve the experience of departmental colleagues. So this was me and my colleague Francesca Cornick, who's a professional services colleague, and so we did well, as you will see, focus groups interviews. We did focus groups with the parental stuff, individual interviews with caring responsibilities, because this is actually touching on very personal issues in people's lives. And some of the interviews were really raw, actually, really raw, painfully honest, and sometimes very emotional, because people are trying to juggle work with their personal lives and often caught in the middle, and talking about it at work in the way that we did can bring up some very difficult thoughts and emotions. But anyway, the writing in the report took account of where it would be going, which was a report back to the Equality Committee, which is sat on by the Dean of the Business School and senior management. So we always erred on the side of absolute, not only formality. So this is our sample group. And via the department newsletter, we asked people who considered themselves to have caring responsibilities to get in touch. 15 responses, 12 people then agreed to speak with us. Now, we know, anecdotally and personally, that there are many more people in the department who have caring responsibilities than actually responded to us. So this is something I think is important to bear in mind if people are thinking about doing something similar, perhaps a little pilot project in their own workplaces. It's possible some people really don't think of themselves as carers or having caring responsibilities, or they prefer not to talk about these issues, or they're suspicious possibly about how the report would be used, how it, whether the anonymity would be watertight. There are always concerns about progression or individual line managers. Maybe we just didn't use all the channels we could have to reach people, but I think it's important to bear in mind. So the majority of people who did respond were women. Most were professional services colleagues. A small number were academics. A couple of men responded. I know there are more men with caring responsibilities, but they're still the minority. Largely, this was about caring for children with additional needs and or parents who are elderly and therefore with increasing health issues, who are ill, declining health. Also, some colleagues caring for spouses as well. So, emerging themes. I won't go through them because we're short of time. These are what I'm going to go through now. So the first emerging themes, once we'd had a look at the data of these 1 hour interviews, which we took detailed notes at. Type of employment is really important. Having an element of flexibility is crucial, essentially. So a lot of people said, I don't know how people make it work full time. How do you balance full-time working and having caring responsibilities? So part-time working was, if you like, a constrained choice for some people. And for some people, it's just what they've been doing anyway. But it really helped them to meet the demands of caring. But that meant that it wasn't without cost in terms of whether they could progress or not. So with my other research hat on, looking at employment, we know that the more senior a job gets, the less likely it is to be available to be done part-time. job sharing is becoming more more available, but it's still largely the expectation is that at the most senior level, you're going to be working flat out, giving your all. So these are some in the blue, some of the quotes. There's also this stigma of part-time. People thought that they were having a great time on their days off. And this one here couldn't go full-time in a million years. So that's with all the juggling. The flexible working was important because people can take time out of the day to do errands, basically. So I'm juggling my computers. So people really wanted to stay at work. Yeah, it maintained a very important sense of identity and a purpose, meaning to their life that was separate from the role of carer. So that came through a lot of the time, and it became clear that was crucial to a lot of people. Importance of being easily contactable when at work. People kept their phones close by them during the day, which I know is an odd sort of thing to say because most of us keep our phones close by during the day. But it was that sense of, if you like, a division. I might be needed. I have to be contactable. So you're trying to be present in the workplace, but also aware that you might have to step out because of the unknown of other people's needs. So opportunities we found were often turned down, work opportunities, because of the huge commitment that is involved, that comes along inevitably with being a carer, with having those sorts of responsibilities. And some people said, as this quote here said, I'd like more responsibility because I miss management. Some people have, if you like, demoted themselves, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I've got much to offer because I don't have the time. And as this other person said, I haven't got the bandwidth. There's only so much I can focus on. And this is the point of this little project that we did. It was trying to surface how people actually feel. We know what the policy is. How do people actually feel about it? Some people said, yes, I've restarted my career at a lower level because there's less pressure, there are fewer targets. People really liked the structure of work, that there was a structure to the day. It was less messy sometimes than the demands of caring responsibilities. And a lot of people talked about feeling guilty, about not being available and reliable 100% of the time. This is what we heard a lot. To be honest, I think organizations often don't realize what great employees they have, because people really talked about that feeling of wanting to be there for their work colleagues and to do the job as well as they possibly could, but inevitably were torn away some of the time and felt really badly about it. A very interesting comment that came up was that the very specific challenges of caring while working actually produced resilient and resourceful employees, because you can't just go in and focus on one thing. You are trying to organize things so that they are done as efficiently and thoroughly as possible within a compressed amount of time or at different sorts of times. So you become, this one person was actually felt really strongly about this. She said, I've become really creative and resourceful, and she brings that to her workplace. Some people were very clear, though, they felt their caring responsibilities were growing, that they weren't static. They felt it was a ticking clock before things got worse. People often said they used annual leave to rest, to lie down and to recover from the juggling act. Some said it's mostly women who are dealing with this and dealing with it in tandem with parenting responsibilities and hormonal changes. So there are all sorts of demands around that. And yeah, taking time off. The guilt came up a lot. essentially, for various different ways. Okay. They felt, I think there's one quote that I have here that hasn't made it onto the slide. Some people felt that it was a waiting game, that inevitably things were going to get worse with for the person they were caring for. And so somebody said, there isn't a win. It's just moving on to the next challenge. It's getting used to that this is the way it's going to be. And other people talked about male colleagues taking up international opportunities, which is a common theme with academics, which help with promotion because their dependents are typically looked after by someone else, generally a sister or a female partner. Again, not across the board, as we know. We were contacted by a couple of men who had these responsibilities, but mainly it was women. Okay, moving on to the next one. So, support from colleagues and managers, and what was sort of cheering for the department to hear, the senior management team to hear, was that there were a lot of positive experiences of support and understanding from line managers that were shared. It was great. It was really nice to be able to report on that. And not least because that feelings of trust, people are trusted that they're not skiving or sloping off and using it as an excuse. Feelings of trust, support, and flexibility, really important to the well-being of the colleague with caring responsibilities and to how successful they are at work. We did find a minority who had negative experiences, and that involved both lack of knowledge of the policy around carers and then inflexible implementation of policy, which sometimes is a nice way of saying people were horrible, really unreasonable. And really, when you're listening to these stories, you think that seems wholly unreasonable, and why are people so inflexible? So but that was a minority, which again I think was a bit of a relief to the department to hear. Supportive team makes all the difference. Some people said there is support, but there's not really a lot of understanding, like deep understanding. You don't really understand until you're in it, which I think probably applies to most situations, but it's because it's an ongoing situation that's quite important. And the people who had less positive experiences talked about management think you're only working part-time. They're not seeing you doing the other hard work of caring. And somebody said, again, it's something that didn't make it onto the slide, you can see that look when you say, I'm a carer. Okay, oh, okay. So, and if you're a line manager, that can be difficult because maybe you have human sympathy, human empathy, but also you're thinking, I've got targets, I've got objectives. Is this going to make life more difficult? Okay. Some people talked about an invisibility culture, that people tend to keep things to themselves. It's not really talked about. And so there's a lack of caring because nobody really knew about it. And there were also some instances raised of the pressures of identity. So different ethnic and cultural backgrounds can bring different pressures, different responsibilities to bear on individuals. People did also talk about they've noticed a change in equality and diversity and inclusion within the department. Things are gradually improving. There's more awareness now, but there is a feeling that gender and race can take priority over other issues, particularly around disability. Again, going back to that positive aspect of saying I find myself, I'm more resourceful, I've developed new skills, I have to be more organized. Because some people said bringing my whole self to work is important, and it can bring different perspectives, which can be very, very useful. what we found was big lack of awareness of policy, which is, again, with my other hat on, is not remotely unusual in workplaces, that policies are often, you become aware of them when you need them, and a lot of lack of knowledge of the passport and that ability to have ongoing conversations with line management. Where it was known about, it was viewed as that, well, that's nice, but I'm not sure how much difference it makes in reality. And again, that's possibly to do with the patchy awareness amongst both managers and staff around policy and what's permissible, what's desirable, etc. So some people say, well, I've had to tell my line manager about the policy. Current line manager is good, is caring. Others have been judgmental and inflexible. Some people say, do you feel you have to sort of figure it out yourself? Which, in a way, again, because caring is highly individualized, makes sense in a way, but people need to feel supported, and that to make sure that the carer's passport doesn't become a tick box nice thing, so that you don't end up with somebody saying, as this quote has it at the bottom, it matters, but it doesn't count. And we'll come back to that at the end. I've got something sort of a bigger point to make, really, about these things. Colleagues said, please raise the profile of caring and carers in the workplace. That would be really helpful to get rid of that invisibility, to make it more normalized, if you like. So structured availability of official information and HR pages was criticised. We know that company and organisational websites vary enormously, and intranets. Suffice to say that Warwick's it could be clearer, and which is again not unusual. But people wanted, if you go down to that bottom quote, people said, I just want a button that I can press that says help, because I haven't got the time or the energy to search my way through innumerable web pages and different links to this and that and the other. So that's really important, particularly people said, when you're in the height of a caring crisis, something has happened, maybe somebody's fallen, and you need to know, can I take time off now? What do I do now? Who do I speak to? Who could help? Perhaps if I can arrange care to come in. You don't want to be struggling through layers and layers and layers of support. So that's a practical thing. And for example, filling out PIP forms, signposting to other external providers, that sort of thing. So, and that thing of no awareness of people in a similar boat, that feeling of struggling alone, which is tied to the idea of invisibility, which is also tied to people perhaps feeling reticent about sharing their personal information. Some people want to come to work and just not bring the other stuff into it. Okay, so in my quick trot through, the overall experience of being a staff member with caring responsibilities was somewhat positive, but not without significant challenges, a lot of lack of awareness, variation in line management according to how flexible they were, who you could talk to, and around career progression was really important. A lot of people felt, I'm just stuck. I'm grateful for the flexibility, but I don't see how I can really progress in my career and take advantage of opportunities in the same way as people without caring responsibilities, because essentially the structures of the organisation carry on regardless, and then there are people being, if you like, flexible and caring within that, but the structures are the structures. Okay. And I think yeah, the daily and longer term working life, I can come back to that in the conversation. So career moves and progression are individual choices, if you like, but so working part-time, stepping out of a management role, that's a choice, but if you like, it's a constrained choice. It's self-selected, but self-deselection isn't visible, yeah, and some types of the absent work isn't visible. So in what ways can the organisation engage? These were some of the recommendations, formal recommendations that came out of the report about publicising policy and the carer's passport and normalising these commitments, which are becoming increasingly common across society, rather than keeping them as individualised and privatised. Consult internally and with the university on policy in relation, for example, there are ongoing caring responsibilities. There are ones that have acute moments, periods of crisis, or that are only for a constrained amount of time. Training. We love training. Training for line managers and HR around awareness of policy and how it operates, how it should operate, how it can operate within each department. Important. Skip over that bit. The online help button I've talked about establishing a network, and that was like a discussion forum or keeping in touch days like you have with maternity leave, for example, to sort of again keep people visible, keep people involved in work, and also to be able to share tips, practice, just feelings, say I'm exhausted, whatever. Now, again, roaring through. Most recent research shows that nearly 60% of unpaid carers are women, and often at particular life stages where they're juggling parenting, hormonal changes, possibly. So there's nothing employers can do about that. They can't change people's life stages. They can't change how society is gendered and who takes on responsibility for these things. But what can be done? What should be done to actually accommodate the realities of caring responsibilities? What are the responsibilities of employing organisations? Well, one thing I'd say is the recommendations in the previous slide aren't expensive, largely around awareness, being flexible, and being supportive, essentially. So changing the orientation from this is a pain, how am I going to manage my team so that I can meet my objectives, to having the message from senior management, if you like, that it's okay to be flexible in a way that means that objectives are met perhaps in a different way or in a staggered way or whatever. And I'm talking in big generalities, and each organisation is going to be different. Working from home has made a big difference. Technology has been a blessing for carers in a lot of ways. But it's really important that the sort of the old habits of monitoring and surveillance, etc., are genuinely informed by the realities of caring. So the recommendation of consultation on policy that was on the previous page does raise an issue that has remained not seen at all. So while a lot of the recommendations we could categorize as logistical, if you like, logistical mutual care, this issue is asking decision makers in the organisation to think about those inflexible structures I was talking about, to reconsider how merit is evaluated in whatever organisation it is. Because how do we start to incorporate different routes through, different ways of navigating the same work paths so that people can progress, people can be recognised within the ways that your particular organisation does recognise merit and worth and doing a good job. Incorporating different ways of doing that would actually be genuinely progressive. And I said at the beginning I had issues around the word inclusion. That's because I think sometimes it can mean that we welcome everybody in to the structures that exist. And sometimes quality, equity, diversity, difference, the messy realities of life don't fit into the existing structures, and we need to start again and rethink where we start from now. If we were designing a properly inclusive way of working and living, how would we design it? Okay, that's my whistle stop.
Thank you very much. That was I know I've heard some of this before, but I have the memory of a goldfish, so it's always great to be reminded. And obviously, because we work for the same organisation, it's good to be reminded of things that I'd forgotten about. So I was making lots of notes, but I would like to start first of all by saying thank you very much for that talk. It resonated with me because I have children with additional needs who are now adult, and I have caring responsibilities of a mother-in-law. So a lot of it now does resonate. But I wondered how. Let me just have a little look at some of my questions to throw it open. I wondered how it resonated with others in the audience, because we're not all academics. I know that certainly Catherine, Ruth, and Karen work for non-academic organisations. I have to confess that I don't know with others that are in the room what your situations are, but I wondered how that resonated. We have two distinct types of staff within universities. We have professional services versus academics, whereas I don't know whether you have such distinctions in practitioner organisations. So I wonder if I could just throw open the floor just to see whether people had any thoughts, comments from their own experiences, from their own organisations. Catherine's got your hand up.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you very much, Deborah. Yeah, I work for government as an operational researcher. So a lot of the support that you mentioned is in place, particularly around flexible working. I think that's the key thought with my head, and the fact that our contracted hours tend in the main to be the hours we work. I think that's different from academia, where you end up having to work a lot more additional hours, and therefore you struggle to work out how you can take on a different working pattern without becoming part-time. So I think that's a key difference. If you don't mind, Francis, I had a sort of a more overall reflection. I think that what this highlights, though, as well, is that there's not a sort of a binary, you're either a carer or you're not. There's a sort of like, every individual's person who is a carer could have very different circumstances. And so it isn't just a case of, I've got the policy, now I know that, oh, that means you have this or these adjustments or whatever. It has to be really tailored to the individual and really work out what they need. Because everything will be different. And I think that's an important thing as well for managers. So I'm in a sort of a more managerial position, and I've worked with people have worked for me, and they've had caring responsibilities, to really understand what that actually means for them. Because I could easily think, oh, I know someone who looks after their mother, or I know someone who's got a child with additional needs, therefore I think I know best about what support you need. But actually, it's all about flipping it around and working with that individual to work out what actually flexibility they need to be able to balance both.
Yeah, sounds like you're the ideal sort of line manager. Because it is going to vary enormously, isn't it? And sometimes even one person, it will be one thing one year, maybe something different 6 months down the line, even. Yeah.
Anyone else? Any thoughts? Ruth?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Ines, Marta, and Sarah as well, because I suspect, well, Sarah's clearly government or DFT. But I was struck, I mean, on this topic of academics versus professionals, I was struck by the balance of responses in your survey, which were, because I had assumed, having had, I'm retired now, happily, it's somebody else's turn to look after me in due course, but I had assumed that the problem was much greater for academics than it would be for professionals, but your responses were not so much from the academics. And I was also interested to see those statistics that you showed, that it's only 60% women, 40% men, which is a much higher percentage of men than I'd expected.
Right.
So I think both of those suggest that I've got a lot of stereotypes which need to be corrected. Your comments, please.
Yes, actually, you're right. The only 60% roughly figure for women does tell us that there are 40% of carers are men, and we tend not to think about that. And the much smaller response to our call for people to come forward or to contact us to have a chat is very interesting in itself. I'm not sure. Well, a lot of people, I think, don't think of themselves as carers, or don't. I mean, I think back to my own at various points in my life. I think possibly now I look back and think, oh, I think I was a carer, but I didn't think about it like that. It was just what I was doing alongside work. And this is becoming now a more formal category, which I think is really good. And but yes, men, very interesting. We need to hear more from the men, and so that it does normalize, as we know. So if the more gender integrated and more mixed it is, the more normalized, more quickly normalized it becomes. Simple as that. It stops being a woman's issue. So yeah, that would be great to perhaps have more research on that. And as for academics, the hours aren't fixed, and you do work ridiculous hours sometimes, but a lot of it is self-exploitation. Now, it's self-exploitation because in a way you have no choice, because the bit that you love doing, the research and the writing, you always find time for, and that means weekends, nights, early mornings, or whatever. And I'm generalizing enormously here, but a lot of academics, I think, well, I've got flexibility to sort of manage it. I sort of manage it unseen, and so would possibly be less likely to come forward. I don't know. Or whether they're always less likely to come forward for our internal surveys anyway, I found. I don't know about you, Francis, but no, yes, they're a rum lot, academics.
Thank you. What about any of the others? Marta, Sarah, Ines, do you have any thoughts? Ines, you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I've been called out now multiple times, so I could talk. I'm also working at DFT, so also a government employee. I have a small child. I have found, I don't know how people do it, not part-time. Yes, there is a lot of flexibility in government. But for me, what resonated hugely was the people are supportive of the flexibility, but they don't know what it means to not work, what I do when I don't work. I work in a very young team. So there is only one other person, and thankfully he exists, who has a small child. So we can be each other's springboard, and that's been very useful. So I'm the only female in my team, and everyone is very young. So that's been tricky. but people were very supportive. So I resonated with both of those statements, very supportive, but not understanding what it means. So it's kind of nice to see that reflected elsewhere. So yeah, it's not a unique feeling. But I do like the fact I have a contracted hours, and I don't have to work more.
Yeah, got it. Absolutely, that's really interesting. I mean, it's great that people are supportive. I wonder if you might be more hesitant to ask for, I don't know, particular flexibility at certain times, even if they're supportive, because you know they don't really understand. Is that a thing?
Yeah, and as like the only female, the only part-timer, it becomes very hard to ask because you don't want to be put into a box. So it's a catch-22.
Yeah. I do think we've got a long way to go yet. We've come a long way. We've got a long way to go yet in terms of sort of getting rid of that divide between the public working life and the private individual life, because you're the same person.
Any other comments from anyone? Open field. Gerard? You're muted, Gerard.
Sorry about that. One of the things that got my attention is this notion of guilt. I wonder whether it's general or not. I am not a carer, I am the receiver of care. As Ruth knows, I have always, for a long time, had polio. But so I need some help, but only in the morning and in the night, when going to sleep. So I can imagine that the care for me is has more discretion over what it is that you have to do. Unlike, for example, with children, where I can imagine that during the daytime you are continuously worrying about things. So I wonder if in the case of children, the guilt is more severe than in other cases.
That's really interesting. And there is a theory around care that I'm currently working on at the moment, which talks about care not as a disposition, somebody is so caring or whatever, but talks about categories of care. So noticing the need to care, taking responsibility for care, and what you mentioned, caring with, recognizing that basically at different points in our lives, we all need care in different ways. We're going to be caring for or need care or caring with each other, and recognizing that, I think, would help minimize the guilt that people feel. And I think, yes, I think children arrive with guilt, sort of ready packaged. There's plenty of guilt to go around as a parent, because you're perhaps always thinking, am I doing this right? Let alone if you have to remove yourself for work or whatever.
Yeah.
But a different attitude towards care that was about, if you like, not a patronizing sort of idea of care as bestowing care, but that recognizing that we all need care at different points and in different ways, might change the conversation and eventually seep into people's attitudes and feelings of guilt, organizational structures and processes, if we just recognize that care is just actually the most fundamental part of being human, which I know is a long way from talking about an organizational policy or caring for a specific individual, a practice of caring for an individual and delivering care and receiving care. But I think we should recognize that it's not private going on somewhere else just between individuals, that as a species, we depend on care.
Thank you both. Ruth, would you like, with just a few more minutes left?
Yeah,
do you want to have a last question, perhaps?
Well, I was just going to comment on that because I think it's hugely important. And I never had to care for anything except relatively healthy children. And I have different employers who had different attitudes to the time I took caring for them. And with the most supportive ones, I never felt guilt towards the employers. And with the least caring ones, I just felt anger, actually. And that kept me going. So I never felt guilt towards my employers, which is one of the things I think you were suggesting, that you feel guilt always. I felt guilty I wasn't giving enough time to the children, but it was so much more fun going to work. I was usually able to push that to one side. But people do have that experience of feeling guilty towards their colleagues. And I think that's a structural issue which work should be able to. You should design a workplace so that, because you're absolutely right, Deborah, care is part of what we have to do. And in some societies, you get support. You get more support than you get from others. And at the moment, in this society, we're getting the worst of several worlds, and people are having to do a lot without the village that should help them. And you can design workplaces that are more supportive. And the trouble with being surrounded by young men is that they're the worst for not knowing what they don't know. And good luckiness. They'll go old sooner or later.
That's so true.
We have a comment from Sarah in the chat. I can't remember whether the chat goes with the video or whether it would be helpful for me to read out the comment. Ruth or Karen, can you remind me? Do you know?
I don't know, so read it
Shall
out.
I read it out just
Yeah.
in case the chat doesn't come through? So this is comment from Sarah. She said, I feel quite fortunate that my team has a number of staff, some managers, who are carers and are open and honest about when they need extra flexibility or time. I appreciate that because it makes it clearer for us what is acceptable to ask for. The guidance is generally very bland and technical without real examples. I can imagine it's far more difficult to know what to ask for and how much of that carer part of yourself you can bring to work without examples. Thanks for that, Sarah.
Yeah, that's terrific. I agree. Policy is generally framed in as broad and general a way as possible. And for example, when we wrote the report on parental leave and parental responsibilities and stuff, there were elements of the bureaucracy within the institution that wanted those living examples taken out. And I'm not quite sure why, but it got blanded out and blanded out and blanded out until it was, as you say, almost too general to be helpful. Where sometimes you really need to have those examples to make it real and give you a sense of, is it okay? Is this all right? So, you might feel, oh, okay, that example, I could do that. That somebody else has done that or whatever. You might feel okay, and you might be blocking yourself without realizing it. Whereas an overall generalization in the policy sometimes just isn't that useful. They're better than nothing, but they can always be better.
So we've come to the end of our time. So let's just start the finishing bit by thanking Deborah on. Should we switch on our mics if we can, so we can do a loud clap for you?
Thank you.
Or a virtual clap. And just to remind everyone that we have a monthly series of events. The next one in March will be Anne Rainish. I'm just reading notes here that Ruth kindly sent me. So she's held a number of jobs in Welsh Government, currently Senior Transformation Manager, working with energy intensive users in Wales to achieve net zero and supporting Net Zero Industry Wales. So from a Warren point of view, she's an experienced mentor and strong advocate of the value of mentoring, whatever your career stage, career potential and ambition. That's our March event. In April, we have a panel from various parts of OR and the analytics world at different career stages, and they will be discussing the things they wish they had known earlier. And then in May, we have eminent Professor Dolores Romero Morales, who will be talking about her research. So keep your eyes and ears open for future events. And thank you so much for coming along today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad we went ahead with it.
Yeah, I thought it was great. A nice little niche chat.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks again, Deb.